in this world, not able to sleep anymore.
Hey guys, how's it going? Writing 123. Yeah, no,
Did your sheep
I'm not
grow
not where
up
it looks, but I did go that
underneath
far and put on some Jack Johnson and some sounds. So I'll turn that off because we're actually just going to be talking about the and I'm going to get rid of that background. Um, we're going to be talking about the writing system that I've described a couple times in class, but that um, haven't really given you in-depth, real examples of, or at any rate, it's worth doing again. I was going to talk about some of the logical fallacies that we discussed today, but I just figured you're in the midst of drafting, and good job on doing those, by the way. I should have gone through all of them by Wednesday. And as I said, and accidentally sent you multiple emails on, but the next 3 pages are going to be due Wednesday at midnight. And for those of you who have asked, yes, definitely just give whatever you have up to that point. You don't need to cut out pages 3 to 6 and turn in a different file. Just turn in all 6 pages together, and that both is easier for you, but also enables me to see the flow of where you're going and that kind of thing. So do that. So what I'm going to do is go through this writing process. And I'm going to do it by sharing my screen and showing you actually a real paper that turned into a chapter of my dissertation and is the next thing, if I were to take the time to work on something published, that I would publish. And the reason I'm doing this is to show kind of the evolution of this method and how it really, I'm not just teaching you because, well, I found this in a book and I guess it's good to teach people how to write. It's what I do, and it really makes writing a research paper much, much more efficient, and in the end, because of that, really much better, because you're not bogged down in the trees and miss the forest, or vice versa. You're not bogged down looking at one particular tree and miss the overall forest, as the metaphor goes. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen, and which I've never done on a recording for this, so hopefully it goes smoothly. And then talk you through what I do here. Here we go. Share. Okay, so I see that I am still up here. I don't know if you can see me or not. Either way, here we go. So the first step is notes. Here, I'm going to write a little more above this. So the process is basically notes with something called a running argument, which I'll talk about in a second, then outline, then draft. If you just try to jump into draft after having looked at your sources, you're going to be pretty scattered and go willy-nilly picking up quotes from here or there, especially as you get into a longer paper. Some people say, well, no, I can just do it all. Honestly, I can definitely keep a lot of things in my head, but after a certain number of pages for something, you need some sort of externalization, some sort of note-taking ability that then you can draw from a large pool, and that you can do all the organization when you're not drafting, so that you're not cluttering up your mind. So here we go. So the first step is just notes, and these are raw notes. I cut out some just for brevity's sake. These are raw notes from when I'm reading, okay? And this is from almost 10 years ago now, when I first read The Sound of Fury for a grad seminar and took notes on it. And I cut out a number of pages of note or references to show you some relevant ones. So basically nothing too surprising here. This is from the novel. And so these two characters bellowing, etc., as Benji holds the fence and watches Caddy leave the ghost in the machine of the South. This is the first time reading it, and I didn't really know what I thought yet. So I'm asking questions of myself, right? Sometimes, when I've come back and read it later, I took more notes, and this is an example of that. This is the first instance of, quote, trying to tell. Now, if you haven't read the novel, you know what that is, but it's just the character, Benji, who isn't able to speak, is actually narrating, quote unquote, the first section of this novel. And so when he's trying to tell, that's when he's actually making noises to the outside world, but to himself, he's just trying to say something, right? And then I made this note to myself, what he's trying to tell is smell, like the way that the trees smelled, inarticulable, namely. And he's bellowing at the golfers, trying to say, he's in fact the most articulate, whatever. The point is that these are notes to myself. Next, and this is an example of how you take a note, but you're also giving meta commentary. And meta commentary means when you are talking about what you're talking about. So here I say huge, huge, kind of a revelation on these pages. Okay, the bright shapes, again, you have to be reading it to know what I'm talking about. Doesn't matter. They're windows. He's describing them when he's going around on this carriage ride. It's these bright shapes are windows. It's also the tops of his wheels, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't matter. You know, and then, wow. The point is, these are notes from the primary source. And I did this for, you know, all 327 pages, whatever. And it's cut off here. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that I have the full bibliographic citation there. Just do that as soon as you start using a source, because if you use it, you're going to have to cite it. So get that citation information up there right away. But the second thing that you'll notice is it's not in alphabetical order. I mean, that one happens to be, but I have an A down here. It doesn't have to be right now. This is for you. And in fact, if you're writing about one primary thing, you know, put your primary source first, or maybe you read it first, so it's going first. Anyway, these notes are for you. That's the bottom line. But again, to make it useful for yourself, include the citation information, and then also, when in doubt, quote. Which these are some older notes. These Sound of the Fury ones, and I don't actually have a lot of quotes. Now it's a little different for a novel because I probably will go back to those pages to unpack them if it's relevant. But when I get to, for example, these are just scholarly articles that I used in this paper. When I get to these, then I do have quotes. So, for example, here's the quote. In the end of the novel, in the complete articulation of the Easter sequence, we find a new order of time. The tragic demise of the Compson's time has undergone a comic reversal. Lester takes Benji to the other side of the book, etc. That's a quote. But what you're beginning to see, and this will bring us to our next thing called the running argument, is that you can feel free to insert your thoughts. In fact, you should, into your notes. So for example, in this note from this Arthur Geffen article, Dilsey's recognition that she has seen the end of the Compson line. That's just a quote to kind of remind myself of what he had just said. But then I say, though Dilsey's statement surely is meant to encompass this quote last, unquote, it seems that given the sermon that has preceded it, in which the repeated cry, I seize him, and oh Jesus, I seize, Faulkner's certainly invoking the name given to the risen Christ 3 times in St. John's Revelation. Quote, fear not, I am the first and the last, I am he that liveth and was dead, and behold, I am alive forevermore. Amen. I'm making a point about this article here. Even though it's my notes, the more that I'm thinking about it and writing kind of something that could be slapped into a draft, the better, because then I can just copy and paste, stick that into the right place in my outline. We'll get there in a second. And, you know, that's part of my draft right there. Okay, so there's notes. And again, you don't just write the quotes, even if I don't have time or I don't want to write out everything I think about this, you know, apparently. I say, Anderson completely misreads Benji's turn about the square, quote, in the end of the novel, just so that I know, you know, how I'm treating this quote and I can more easily put it in the right spot in the paper. Okay. So the running argument. Now, this, I don't want this to be confusing. And I only call it this because a brilliant professor that I once asked about how to write a research paper called it this. He said he had 3 files. He had his notes, and then he had something called a running argument, and then, you know, outline and draft or whatever. And in the running argument, it's as if you try out your ideas in paragraphs and things. And it's almost like if you're trying to like work on a paper every day, well, you aren't always ready to like sit down and draft something, or maybe a book, which is, you know, going to be a longer work. You just sit down and put out hard draft pages. But you can write little bits of thoughts that are more than notes, you know. So this doesn't have to be a separate file in the system. And in fact, I've found simply that it's just, for me, easier to combine that with my notes. So you can already see it back there, but these were all actually taken, these examples, from the actual notes that I was writing as I read these different sources. So the Geffen source, for example, here, this is in the midst of other notes like this one, I'm taking quotes, whatever, but then I also would write things like this. The locus of sacrality is not, as Geffen asserts, described purely along racial lines. It is rather placed by the degree of faith in abstract language. Benjy, with all his, quote, trying to say, unquote, fits in comfortably amongst the black congregation, especially as the preacher leaves behind the so-called white exactitude of propositional philosophical language for the narratological incarnated language of story and deixis. It's in the midst of a complicated argument. It doesn't have to make sense to you. The point is, this isn't notes. This isn't, or not just notes, and it's not derived purely from the thing I'm reading. Instead, this is my own thoughts, kind of written in a way, as I say up here, it's almost drafting. You might as well do it when you're taking your notes. You're writing notes, basically, you're talking to yourself, but you're doing it in a way that hopefully you could use large chunks of it. Okay, so I hope this doesn't sound more complicated than it is. The point is, at every step, save yourself time, right? When you take notes, do your citation. When you are taking your notes, do quotes and make sure they're right then. Write down your page numbers, as you'll see throughout. Oh, that's something else I meant to say. When you're doing your notes, these are page numbers. When I got to, this page, I had a note, so I just wrote 5 space and started writing. When I do quotes out of these articles, I have the page number right there, okay? So again, this next part where I'm fleshing it out more, I keep in the notes. Okay. And some of it's a little less, it's not quite a draft. So for example, this is notes to myself, but it's fleshing out more than simply, here's a thought on this one particular source, right? So I say, my contribution, yes, Geffen's right. The South asserting sort of Confederate time, holding on to a failed civil religion, exploits of the South, etc., emphasis on Confederate monument, but he misses Benjy as the clock face, the sacrifice, the sun, the incarnation of the ineffable desire of the South to retrograde, etc. The point is, this wouldn't be a draft, but it's more than simply, here's a note on this page. I'm kind of like, here's my argument. I'm always thinking, like, what is it that I'm trying to say? And where does this bit fit in the overall picture, and so again, this could still be like copied and pasted into an outline and or even to the basic draft, but then I rewrite something like this that's clearly just written informally to myself. Okay, so the next outline. Now, this was basically an outline that I was starting to write in these same notes, and so it's not a great example. It doesn't look beautiful. It's pretty just basic, but it shows how you can use this system to make yourself efficient. So I started by just, okay, I think, Benjy's functioning as a Christ figure in this novel. How? Well, he incarnates the preoccupation of time within the novel. How? Well, he's the hand of the life-size clock face in the final scene. Why do I think this? And that's notes to myself. But then here, for example, I just copied and pasted the same thing that I had, right? Deland Anderson completely misreads Benjy's turnabout the square. And yet, in this section about how I am interpreting his trip around the town square, copying and pasting my notes, right? Now, maybe the next point I want to say, and this is an example of a not fleshed out outline yet, right? So the sermon then, another scene, as the location of where we see this unreliability of words, the deconstruction of logocentrism. Geffen, question mark, so should I use that source in here? Should I discuss from a linguistic philosophic side? And if so, okay, Derrida, that's an author. This book, quote, so this is me sketching out, right? An outline of what I might say, okay? This is more getting closer to a fully fledged outline with notes inserted. And then from there, if you do this through all your notes and things, you really get this fleshed out outline that looks like this, which again, it's a lot of text, but don't think that that means necessarily a lot of work. It's a lot less work than going just drafting cold to copy and paste your notes into a big structure of an outline. And then drafting is less work than just sitting down and writing something. It's less work with a good result anyway. And one step that I've mentioned in class that I haven't yet, and I'll do that before I talk about drafting methods, is this. you go back to your notes. Well, maybe you've begun to say to yourself, okay, I want to look at Benji as the clock face. I'm just making this up, right? And then also the way I want to look at the sermon scene as a way that we learn about language and time in the novel, whatever, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, anything that has to do with Benji as clock face is, where's my highlighters, right? Is going to be red. Anything that has, and you go through and start looking at each note and say, okay, does this have to do with this? Oh, you know what? That's a new topic. And you write down your third topic. You do that as just creating buckets. You can do that before your outline. In fact, you should. First, create your buckets. Benji as Christ figure. And again, you don't have to know exactly, right? The sermon scene as indicative of blah, 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 right? You start, as you're looking at your notes, you're like, okay, a few things are about this, a few things about this, and you start just creating your buckets. And then you go through and you say, okay, this can be my red bucket. It doesn't have to be done by color. I'm not necessarily a color person myself. So I would probably just go and make 2 files here and then go copy and paste everything that I thought fit under here, just like that, and copy it and paste it under here. And then you come up with a list. But then you begin to see that, oh, now I've structured things. It's not just, okay, I've got this one source. I'll talk about this one source. Now I've got this other source. Just talk about this source. Now I've got this source. Instead, you're driving the research vehicle, right? And so you start to look at the common threads throughout your notes. And then from there, you start piecing, one quote from this source goes into this bucket, but another quote from the source goes into the second bucket. Meanwhile, and then you've got a fully orbed set of sources that have to do with your various points. Remember, your sources don't have to agree with your points. They don't even have to disagree or touch on your points directly. They just have to be something that is logically related to that, or that you can make logically related to that. Okay, so then you outline, and then you start inserting your notes and quotes and things in there, right? Okay, well then how do you draft? Well, you can do it any way you want. Here's how I do it, how I have done it. You can just put this in another file, have it on a separate tab, and go back and forth, draft. Okay, now what's next? What I like to do, it feels very satisfying. Of course, you save your outline and save whatever, but then I copy and paste it into my draft, okay? Just like this. Now, I would maybe start up here, and I'm just gonna start writing. Let's see if I probably been big. That's okay, this way you can see. This is my draft, right? We can see that Benji operates as a Christ figure in blah, 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 because he incarnates, right? Here I am, first point. The novel's ubiquitous concern with time, et cetera, et cetera. What did I do here? Got an extra letter. Anyway, so you just start drafting above there. Now this is a little misleading because I made it really big, so it looks odd, and that's not what you want. So I don't know if you can still see this, but so what I do is literally start typing right above my outline, and maybe I'll go like this so I can kind of see, and I feel so much of writing is like you've got to trick yourself into feeling okay about it so you make progress. That's the sad truth. So for me, I like to have a little bit of space so I can see my paragraph and how it feels as a piece of writing. But then I have the bit of outline right there, and then I will literally, okay, I wrote that. Okay, now I'm down here. It's like, and I will reread that part. Like, okay, did I get all that? Yeah, okay, and I explained it. Okay, next point, and I just keep going and deleting the outline below as I go because I have it saved somewhere else. I've done it different ways, but that is a nice way to do it, and you really do feel like I'm writing to my outline. All your, you don't even have to go to another tab. All your quotes are right there. Copy and paste it up as you're going, and then delete as you go, and it's like you're eating it's like Pac-Man, which I'm not that old. I didn't actually play Pac-Man, but you've all seen it, right? It's just, never mind. Anyway, so that's basically the gist of drafting. there's one other thing I was going to say that I'm not going to waste time trying to think of right now. At any rate, that's the method. I've done it tons of times with papers, and yeah, it works, not just, as I said, for speed, but for clarity and quality. And you can always, it's much easier to jump around and edit things when you have the structure laid out for yourself that way. If I think of the other thing, I will shoot you an email. Okay, that's it for today. Keep working on those drafts. It's been fun to correspond and talk with on the phone, several of you. Hope you're doing well and surviving. At least the weather's getting nice here in Eugene. Take care, be well, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye.